My own daughter looked at me with pity as she pushed the papers across the dining room table. The ones that would sign away my home, my name, my entire life. "It's for the best, Mom," she said. She thought she was being kind. She had already spoken to the realtors, already picked out my new, smaller room from a glossy brochure. In her mind, I was just a final piece of business, an estate to be settled, a problem to be managed. They looked at me and saw a frail old woman, a signature waiting to be collected. They didn't see the woman who had quietly managed everything behind the curtain for 50 years. So when they put the pen in my hand, I didn't hesitate. My hand didn't tremble. I signed my name in the same clear, steady script my husband had always admired. I gave them what they wanted most in the world. But they never understood one simple truth. My signature wasn't a surrender. It was the trigger. Before we continue, please leave a comment telling us where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel. We're creating a community of incredible people who know that our best chapters can happen at any age. Now back to the story. The Polish on the dining table was older than most marriages. 70 years of lemon oil and elbow grease, holding on to a soft gleam like it had something to prove. My daughter's smile, on the other hand, was new, and it didn't belong to her. It was the kind of smile people wear when they're trying to look concerned but smell opportunity. Too many teeth, no warmth. 3 months after we buried Arthur, the silence in the house had shifted. It wasn't the dense quiet of mourning anymore. It was the pause before a conversation you don't want to have. The kind that starts with, "Mom, we've been thinking." Caroline eased her handbag down beside her chair like she was marking territory. "Mom," she said, using that careful tone she saves for fragile things she's about to break. "David and I think it's time for a proper conversation about your assets. We just want to simplify things for you." I didn't answer right away. My thumb found a scratch in the wood. A tiny scar from when Leo was 6 and drove a plastic soldier across the table like it was Omaha Beach. I could still hear Arthur laughing. "Character, Ellie. Every good table needs some." Caroline again, sharper now. "Did you hear me?" "I heard you." I kept my voice even. "You want to talk about my money?" She blinked. The smile stayed, but it shrank. "We want to talk about your well-being," she said. "This house, the taxes, the upkeep, it's too much for one person." The phrasing was too clean. I could picture it on a presentation slide, budgeting bullet points, estate planning headers. I taught her how to use Excel at this table. Now she was running the numbers on me. I let the silence do the work. Caroline's always hated silence. She thinks it's empty. I know better. Finally, she offered the big reveal. "We've already spoken to a real estate agent. They'll handle everything. You won't have to lift a finger." That was the moment I left the room in my mind. Not far, just a quick trip back 40 years. Same room, different day. Arthur at the head of the table, a stack of ledgers in front of him. He looked up and smiled. "Don't know what I'd do without my Chancellor of the Exchequer," he said, and I'd laughed like we had all the time in the world. He was the dreamer. I was the one who made the math work. And Caroline, she seemed to have forgotten that. Later that night, when the house had gone quiet again, I stood in Arthur's study, the scent of old paper and lemon oil wrapped around me. I didn't bother with the lamp. My fingers knew where to go under the roll-top drawer to a hidden latch Arthur had shown me once long ago. "For rainy days," he'd said, "or when the vultures start to circle." The panel clicked open. No jewels, no emergency cash, just a cream envelope. My name on the front, Arthur's handwriting steady as ever. I opened it without hesitation. "My dearest Ellie, if you're reading this," it started. "They'll talk about your age, your grief. They'll try to make you doubt your own footing, but they forget. You were always the one who knew how to stretch a pound until it turned into 5. They don't know about the Oakseed portfolio. Caroline sees the house. David sees the savings account. They're staring at the map, Ellie, but only you know where the treasure is buried. Call Davies. He has the paperwork. Don't let them reduce this life to numbers. Make them read the fine print. That was always your specialty. Love always, Arthur." After Caroline left, the silence didn't settle. It prowled. My house, once a refuge, had turned into a kind of museum. Each room holding an artifact of my children's disappointment or entitlement. The objects hadn't changed. The way I saw them had. I went to our bedroom and opened the old jewelry box. The velvet slot where my sapphire necklace once rested was still empty. Arthur gave me that necklace on our 25th anniversary. The blue was as deep as his eyes. I remembered selling it. 5 years ago, Caroline had called crying. Not the sharp sobs of someone broken, but the theatrical tremble of a woman trying to make a performance land. Her boutique, the passion project du jour, was collapsing under its own whimsy. "Just a bridge loan, Mom," she'd said. "I'll pay you back with interest." Arthur and I sat up that night running numbers. We didn't have 10,000 lying around, but we had the necklace. "It's just a thing, Ellie," he'd said, his hand over mine. "She's our daughter." So I took it downtown. The jeweler had fingers like old tools, too blunt for something so fine. Still, I walked out with a check and a stomach full of regret. Caroline never used the word loan again. When I brought it up a year later, gently she rolled her eyes. Oh, Mom, don't be dramatic. Think of it as an investment. Sometimes they don't pan out. It was just money. Just money. As if Arthur's love could be itemized, reduced, and written off. On the mantel, a photo of David grinned back at me. His first house, porch freshly painted, shirt tucked like someone playing grown-up. We'd taken a second mortgage on our own home to fund his down payment. 6 years of no holidays, casseroles on repeat, and mending shirts at the seams. We did it gladly. We thought we were giving him a foundation. A week after Arthur's funeral, David called. His voice had that too casual tremor that tries to sound concerned, but rings hollow. Mom, I've just been thinking with the medical bills and everything. I hope there's still enough left for you. I mean, Laura and I are just worried. There was a pause. That beat of honesty no one admits out loud. He wasn't worried about me. He was watching the inheritance shrink. But the final break didn't come over the phone. It came in Arthur's last days. He was asleep in the armchair, oxygen hissing quietly beside him. Caroline was visiting, said she was here to help. I stepped out to make tea. When I came back, she was in the living room, measuring tape in hand, eyeing the wall behind the bookcase. She flinched when she saw me. Oh, Mom, I was just thinking this room gets such great light. When you eventually downsize, I had a few ideas. She was mapping her remodel while Arthur's breath still fogged the air. That was the moment, the one that cracked the last illusion. My grief for Arthur was clean, but what came next wasn't. It was sharp and still and cold. A realization. My children weren't waiting for me to die. They'd already decided I was gone. Back in Arthur's study, I opened the drawer and reached for the letter. The paper was cool and smooth like a stone at the bottom of a river. I didn't need to reread it. His words had moved in permanently. The vultures weren't circling. They were already perched. Arthur didn't leave me a farewell. He left me a strategy and something better than comfort, a reason. The memory of that yellow measuring tape had faded, but its shadow still stretched across the table between us. I brought myself back to the room, to the polished mahogany, to Caroline, who now sat across from me with all the grace of a corporate takeover. Her patience had worn thin. My silence to her looked like frailty, but I wasn't surrendering. I was watching. She tapped the paper she'd slid toward me, one manicured finger drumming a silent demand. Mom, she said, dropping the daughterly warmth for something more efficient. Colder. David sat beside her, hunched and quiet, eyes fixed on a knot in the floorboards. That was David for you, present, but never really there. Caroline had always done the steering. He just went where the car took him. We don't have all day, she added with a tight little laugh, dry as kindling. The market waits for no one. Then she leaned in, her voice softening to something almost gentle, almost the sunk tone she used on cashiers who made too much eye contact. Pity disguised as kindness. Let's be honest, she said. You're too old to really understand money anymore, Mom. This is for your own good. Just sign it. And there it was. No more choreography, no soft landing, just the verdict. I looked down. The paper was already halfway across the table, like it had made its own way there. The title was bold and humorless, Durable Power of Attorney. 4 words that looked clinical, almost helpful, until you understood what they meant. This wasn't a request. It was a quiet eraser, not of my name, but of my agency. Every dollar Arthur and I had saved, every inch of this house. The mortgage we took out to help David, the necklace I sold to prop up Caroline's boutique, all of it compressed into a line for me to sign and vanish under. And she was doing it with a smile. I kept my eyes on the document, let the silence grow. Let it stretch just enough for Caroline to take as a win. Then I sighed, a breath slow and shallow, just enough to read as tired. I let my shoulders ease forward. I let her see the weight she thought I couldn't carry anymore. All right, dear, I said, my voice low. If you think it's for the best. Her whole body changed. The tension uncoiled. That tight-lipped smile relaxed into something open, almost smug. She leaned back like a general watching the gates swing open, like she'd won without a single shot fired. She thought she'd won, and I let her think that. The silence after Caroline left wasn't peace. It was pressure, awaiting silence, thick with calculation. She thought I'd surrendered. Thought I'd slipped quietly into old age like a boat drifting off its mooring. But the water was still not empty. The first crack showed on Tuesday. I was calling the bank, same as always, to move Leo's book money into his account. A small monthly transfer. A rhythm I'd kept like clockwork. I'm sorry, Mrs. Vance, the teller said, voice polite but firm. We can't authorize that transfer today. There's a hold on the account. My hand tightened on the phone. A hold? I didn't place a hold. No, ma'am. It was placed this morning by a Miss Caroline Vance. She cited concerns about potential elder fraud, requested that any unusual withdrawals require her verbal approval. I stood there, the world narrowing to the hiss of the line. Elder fraud, the kind of phrase that lives in policy manuals and warning posters at the bank. She'd borrowed the language of protection, then twisted it into control. $10,000 for her boutique. That was helping family, a couple hundred for Leo's books. Suddenly, I was a liability. A woman who might fall for a scam, rather than the one who'd balanced this household like a war budget. She hadn't even waited for the signature. She was already acting like she had it. That afternoon, another blow, quieter, but just as sharp. I was in the garden trimming the old roses Arthur used to love when Mr. Henderson's truck rumbled up the drive. He stepped out with his gloves still on, then tugged them off awkwardly. "Afternoon, Mrs. Vance." He couldn't quite meet my eyes. "I got a call this morning from your David." I looked up, calm on the outside, and said to send all future invoices directly to him. He cleared his throat and said you'd been having some memory trouble that you might forget to pay. There it was. Not just control over money, but narrative. They weren't just seizing the house. They were writing a new story, one where I was fading, confused, out of my depth. David, my boy who used to cry when his goldfish died, now repeating his sister's lines like a man reciting scripture. And Bill, a man who had seen me trim hedges in a thunderstorm, now gently patting my arm like I might forget why he was there. "Thank you for telling me, Bill," I said. "You'll keep sending the invoices to me, just as we always have." He nodded, relief in his shoulders. I watched him drive away, then turned to look at the house. They thought they were taking over. They thought they were clever. But all they were doing was confirming every plan Arthur and I had quietly laid down brick by brick. They were building their case, and they had no idea they were building mine. I stayed in the garden long after Bill Henderson's truck rumbled away, pruning shears still in my hand like a weapon. I hadn't realized I was holding them. Getting forgetful? That's what they were saying now. Not to me, of course, never directly. The story was being published behind my back, passed from teller to gardener to anyone who might one day be called upon to nod solemnly and say yes. She had seemed confused. The shears were colder than the air. I set them down on the stone bench. The scrape of steel on granite echoed louder than it should have. Final, not defeat, a shift. I walked back into the house, past the living room, where Caroline had measured the wall like it was hers to redesign. Down the hall, where the old mahogany side table still held the house phone and Arthur's stubborn legacy, a dust-covered Rolodex. He'd always said paper didn't crash, didn't forget passwords, didn't vanish into clouds. I turned the wheel slowly. The names flipped past like ghosts. Plumbers, accountants, cousins I hadn't spoken to since Reagan was president. Then I saw it. Davies Allister Law Offices in Arthur's pencil below the printed name. The architect. I lifted the heavy receiver and dialed the number from memory. It rang twice. "Mr. Davis's office," said a voice crisp enough to fold linen. "This is Eleanor Vance," I said. "Please tell him it's time." No confusion, no follow-up question. "One moment, Mrs. Vance." A pause, then a familiar voice, drier than it used to be, but still sharp. "Eleanor, I've been expecting you. They're moving faster than we thought." "Greed tends to," he said. "Come at 3. The city hadn't changed, but the drive felt different. I wasn't a widow running errands. I was a chancellor returning to court. Davies' office was still in that converted bank, where the walls smelled of old ink and leather, and the kind of time that doesn't tick loudly. I stepped inside, and was met with the weight of wood and silence. The grandfather clock in the corner marked time with the certainty of law, not sentiment. Davies didn't rise when I entered. He simply gestured to the chair opposite his desk, worn leather, familiar. He was as I remembered him. Silver hair, precise suit, the kind of man who ironed his shoelaces if given the time. No pleasantries. I opened my handbag, took out the envelope, and slid it across the desk. It landed just beside his inkwell. Arthur's last move on a board still in play. Davies didn't open it right away. He looked at me, then the envelope. "R," he said, and nothing more. He slipped on his glasses and read in silence. I watched his face, not for surprise, but for confirmation. A slight narrowing of the eyes. A breath held a beat longer than usual. Then a ghost of a smile, tight, calculated, familiar. "He always did play 3 moves ahead," he said. "They've called the bank," I said. "Told the gardener. I'm losing my mind." "They think the checkmate is already on the board," Davis replied. "They're sure of it." Good, he stood, walked to a fireproof cabinet and opened it with the reverence of a vault. From within, he pulled a thick folder, overstuffed, dog-eared, weighty. He dropped it on the desk with the satisfaction of inevitability. The tab read, OK Seed. They have no idea what's coming. He opened it. Pages spilled out like a secret, finally ready to speak. It was all there. Trusts, transfers, protections wrapped in language so dense it could choke a court. I didn't need the details. I'd helped plant the seed with Arthur years ago. Davis had grown it into a fortress. He tapped a final page. Clean, precise, nearly empty. This is the kill shot, he said. Sign this with a witness and everything moves. The trust activates. Irrevocable, executable, and thanks to their arrogance, they've already given us the evidence we'd need if they tried to contest. You won't just keep what's yours. You'll leave them watching it pass out of reach. I looked from the document to Davis, and for the first time in months, I felt something other than grief. It wasn't joy. It wasn't satisfaction. It was cleaner than that. Purpose. This wasn't a defense. It was a response. The meeting they were planning, the one where I'd hand them control, they would still get their meeting, but not the ending they expected. When I left Mr. Davies's office, the plan sat in my handbag like a loaded pistol, silent, invisible, and absolutely certain. Arthur's foresight didn't feel heavy. It felt like armor. I walked out into the bright afternoon, the edges of the world somehow clearer. I wasn't waiting anymore. I was watching, listening. Ready? The cue arrived on Sunday in the form of Leo. No phone call, no warning. Just the knock at the door and my grandson standing there with a paper bag in one hand and the kind of cautious smile that belonged more to his grandfather than to his mother. "Hi, Grandma," he said. "I brought you that oolong you like from the shop downtown." I was in the area. He wasn't. He lived 3 hours away. I stepped aside and let him in, my heart suddenly too full for my chest. He walked into the kitchen like it still belonged to him, which it did in ways that mattered. As I filled the kettle, he leaned against the counter, trying to look casual and failing spectacularly. His discomfort clung to him like static. "Grandma," he said, not meeting my eye. "I don't want to get in the middle of anything, but I overheard Mom. She was talking to Uncle David. She's pushing hard, like really hard about the house, about your accounts. She sounds so sure of everything." He paused. "Just be careful." And then, in the most un-Caroline gesture imaginable, he stepped forward and hugged me. Really hugged me. No polite shoulder tap, no quick pat, just arms around me like he meant it. "I love you," he said quietly into my hair. It was the first honest human contact I'd had from family since Arthur died. And when he pulled away, I saw it. The truth I hadn't known I'd been waiting for. Not just that he cared, that he understood, that he saw the difference between kindness and control, that the best of Arthur hadn't died with him. It had simply skipped a generation. That night, I didn't sleep. I didn't need to. Everything was clear. The oak seed wasn't just a trust. It was a promise, and I finally knew who it was meant for. The next morning, I returned to Mr. Davis's office, the leather chair greeting me like an old friend. I told him about Leo. He nodded once as if I'd just confirmed a variable in an equation. Then he pulled 2 stacks of paper from his desk drawer. They looked identical, legal, important, full of purpose, but one was a sword, the other a stage prop. The first was the real deal, the signature packet for the Oak Seed Irrevocable Trust. Dozens of pages, every clause and detail Arthur and I had ever dreamed of, wrapped in legal language dense enough to stop bullets. The second was the decoy. "Memorandum of familial intent," Davy said, tapping the top page like a magician revealing a trick. "It sounds official. It says absolutely nothing, just sentimental fluff about trust and transitions." "Perfect bait," I smiled. "She won't read past the title. She won't have to. She already thinks she's won. When I got home, I made the call myself." "Caroline, dear," I said, letting my voice carry the weight of imagined confusion. "You're right. It's all a bit much for me. I think I'm ready to sign." The silence on her end was brief but electric. "Oh, Mom," she gushed, each word dripping with feigned compassion. "That's such a relief. You're doing the right thing. I'd like to do it Thursday," I said. "Here at the house. Mr. Davies can join us just to make sure everything's proper. He's an old friend. That sealed it." Bringing in Davies, the antique lawyer from her father's era, was the perfect camouflage. She'd see a relic, not a threat. Someone to humor, not someone who could dismantle her plan with a single line of legal ease. "Of course," she said brightly. "I'll bring a mobile notary. We'll get it all wrapped up neat and tidy. Perfect." She was walking straight into the trap with a witness in tow. After I hung up, I called Davies. She bit. "Good," he said. Now we finished the board. He made one final move that afternoon. Nothing dramatic, just a small clean wire transfer. $5,000 from the visible savings account into a new numbered sub-account titled OS Vance 1. It wasn't the money that mattered. It was the timestamp, the breadcrumb, the legal proof that the trust had already begun to move before Caroline ever saw a pen. The documents were in place, the players were gathered, and my daughter was about to watch her imagined inheritance evaporate in real time while smiling through the paperwork. Wednesday arrived with a stillness that didn't feel peaceful. It was the kind of quiet that hangs in the air before something breaks. I spent the morning like I always did, reading the paper, watering the houseplants, keeping up the appearance of a calm, aging woman just trying to get through the day. It was an old habit, pretending to be ordinary. This time I wore it like armor, but my children weren't pretending. They were celebrating. Around noon, Caroline sent an email to David. I wouldn't see it until later, but when I did, the words hit harder than I expected. Not because of what they said, but because of how little they tried to hide. Tomorrow at 2 at the house. Mom's signing everything over. Davies will be there, but he's harmless. Already spoke to Brenda at the realty office. Listing plan is in motion. We'll catch the tail end of the summer market. Grab anything you want from the attic. That was it. No greeting, no emotion. Just a checklist. The house wasn't Mom's, it wasn't ours. It was real estate now, already halfway sold in Caroline's mind. My life, my memories, my home reduced to a line item in someone else's portfolio. Later that afternoon, the phone rang. I knew the voice before she spoke. "Hi, Mom," Caroline said too cheerfully, like someone calling to congratulate a contest winner. "Just wanted to check in before tomorrow. I'm so glad we're finally wrapping this up. It'll be a relief for you." I gave her a soft, vague sound in response. That seemed to satisfy her. "Well," she continued, "once we sign, I thought we could take a look at some options. I've brought a few brochures from a really lovely retirement place not too far from me. It's called Willow Creek. They have social hours and a really nice dining hall." She paused, waiting for me to respond. I didn't. She went on. "I actually spoke with the director," she added casually. "We've already put a temporary hold on a 1-bedroom for you. It's got a great view of the parking lot." She said it like she'd done me a favor. That was the moment the temperature in the room dropped. It wasn't just that she had chosen a new home for me. It was that she thought she could choose. She'd made decisions with my money, scheduled showings for my house, blocked off a small, tidy room for my future, all without a single document signed. I looked around the living room. Arthur's chair, the faint scratch in the floor where Leo's toy had left its mark, the sunlight catching the edge of the old rug we picked out together. This wasn't property. It was the blueprint of a life, and she had already started erasing it. "That's very thoughtful of you, Caroline," I said, keeping my voice steady, almost warm. "I look forward to seeing it." She didn't hear the edge beneath the words. She heard surrender. She had no idea she was walking into the trap we'd spent years preparing. Thursday came, not with thunder, but with sunshine, sharp and almost smug as it poured through the dining room windows. It lit up the dust in the air, turning each tiny mote into a spotlight. It was a beautiful day for a betrayal. I moved through the morning in quiet ritual. I drank my tea from the old porcelain cup with the faded violets on the rim. I walked the garden, letting my fingers brush the bark of the oak tree. I wasn't saying goodbye. I was standing in witness to a life, mine and Arthur's, that ran deeper than any of them could see. This wasn't grief. It was preparation. At exactly 1:45, Mr. Davies arrived. His gray sedan turned into the drive like it had 1,000 times before. He stepped out slowly, briefcase in hand, thin leather, just large enough to carry what mattered, 2 documents and a pen. "Are you ready, Eleanor?" he asked. I gave him a nod. "I've been ready." We sat across from each other at the dining room table, the same one where Arthur and I once did our taxes and planned every vacation we couldn't afford. The wood gleamed in the sunlight. The clock in the hall ticked softly, a steady metronome counting down not to my defeat, but to their mistake. At 2 sharp, a dark car crunched over the gravel. Too fast, too loud. Caroline was first through the door, sharp in a fitted pantsuit, her heels clicking across the floor like a judge's gavel. Behind her came David, slower, smaller. He looked like someone who had already decided to regret the afternoon. Trailing them was a third figure, a younger woman in a tight blazer, carrying a briefcase and a portable notary embosser. Her face was neutral, polished. She didn't look at me like a person. She looked at me like a signature. "Mom, Mr. Davies," Caroline said, already halfway through the room. She didn't pause for warmth. "This is Miss Albright. She's our notary, just to keep things clean and official." Miss Albright nodded, crisp and silent, and placed her case on the table with a soft thud. Without asking, Caroline dropped into the chair at the head of the table, Arthur's chair. She didn't hesitate, didn't blink. David sat beside her, eyes cast down. On the table, Caroline placed a folder, glossy, colorful, the brochures from Willow Creek. She spread them out like realtors do with open house flyers. She didn't say a word about them. She didn't need to. Then came the main event. She pulled a set of papers from her briefcase and laid them in front of me. The durable power of attorney. She smoothed the pages with both hands like she was ironing out my resistance. "Well," she said with a voice like syrup over steel, "no need to draw this out. I know this is hard for you, Mom, so we'll keep it quick." She turned to Mr. Davies, her expression all confidence and control. "You've explained everything to her. I assume that this is just a routine document. Nothing complicated, simply to help her manage things more efficiently." Mr. Davies blinked slowly, playing his part. "My dear Caroline," he said, voice soft and worn, "I'm only here to ensure Eleanor's wishes are respected." It was a promise I made to her husband. Caroline gave a short laugh, sharp and dismissive. "Arthur's promises," she said. The words were heavy with contempt, as if his memory were a burden she'd been carrying too long. They thought they had won. They believed the scene was theirs to direct. The paperwork, the witness, the old lawyer too slow to matter. They looked at me and saw a box waiting to be checked. What they didn't see was that I wasn't the audience. I was the one holding the gavel. The dining room was silent, heavy with expectation. The Willow Creek brochures sat fanned out on the table, bright and garish like decorations for a celebration I hadn't agreed to attend. Caroline tapped the stack of legal papers in front of her. The power of attorney. Her fingers were sharp and impatient. She thought she was minutes away from victory. "Okay, Mom," she said, trying to sound gentle, but it was the kind of gentleness people use when they're pushing someone out of a room. She slid the paper across the table. It stopped right in front of me. "Time to sign." I looked at it. I didn't need to read the words. I already knew what they meant. They were an ending, not just of rights, but of identity. I reached for the pen. My hand trembled slightly, but it wasn't fear. It was the slow, steady burn of adrenaline. Then Mr. Davis cleared his throat loud and dry. The sound sliced through the moment like a snapped twig. Caroline's head jerked toward him. She was already annoyed. "Eleanor," he said, drawing the moment out. "Before you sign that very important paper, I believe I misplaced a small memo. Something minor about the garden. Arthur was always particular about those details." Caroline let out an exaggerated sigh. "Garden maintenance? Seriously?" Mr. Davis didn't flinch. "Best to keep things tidy," he said. He opened his folder, shuffled a few pages slowly, deliberately. "Ah, here it is." In one smooth move, he placed a single sheet of paper on top of the POA. He adjusted it, lining up the bottoms so they looked like one document. Then he set his heavy fountain pen beside it. "There we go," he said, giving me a quiet nod. All in order, I picked up the pen. It was solid, cold, balanced. My hand no longer trembled. I looked at Caroline, her grin at David, his guilt. I thought of Arthur. I thought of Leo. Then I signed Eleanor Vance. The reaction was immediate. Caroline lunged forward, snatching the paper from the table like it might escape. She didn't even read it. She just held it high, smiling like a woman who had just conquered a kingdom. "It's done," she said, beaming at David. "Witness that, please." The notary took it without a word. She glanced at the signature, added her own, then pressed her stamp into the page with a firm metallic click. It was official. And then, just as Caroline reached for her trophy, Mr. Davis spoke. His voice was different now. No more stalling, no more dawdling. "You might want to read what she actually signed." Caroline froze. Her hand hovered. Her smile faltered. "What?" she asked, sharp. "Now it's the POA." She looked down at the paper, really looked. Her face changed. It wasn't confusion. It was fear. She grabbed it from the notary, her eyes darting across the page. "What is this?" she whispered. Mr. Davies leaned back, calm as ever. "That," he said, "is the document your father and I prepared. It's titled, and I quote, 'The Oak Seed Irrevocable Trust Final Declaration.' It's the final move in a portfolio Arthur created to protect what truly mattered." He paused. "A portfolio currently valued," he added, "at just over $9 million. David made a small, strangled noise. He looked like he'd been hit. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Caroline turned pale, not angry, not even shocked, just blank, empty, like she'd fallen out of her own story. Mr. Davies continued, his voice steady. "With that signature, which you helpfully had notarized, your mother has fully funded the trust. That includes this house and all liquid assets, everything." He looked right at her, and per the terms she and Arthur agreed on, the sole beneficiary is her grandson, Leo Vance. Your son. There was nothing left to say. Caroline stumbled back a step. She braced herself against the table. Her hands were shaking now. She stared at me like I'd just disappeared and been replaced by someone else. Mr. Davies gave the notary a polite nod. And on behalf of my client, he said softly, thank you for bringing a notary. The dining room was silent. Caroline stood frozen, the signed page clutched in her hand like a verdict she delivered to herself. Her face was pale, her eyes wide. David made a choked sound, small and broken, but said nothing. The title on the page burned in the still air. Oakseed Irrevocable Trust. Then Caroline whispered, No. She shook her head. No, you can't. You can't do this. Her voice cracked and rose, fury blooming in her throat. This is fraud, trickery. She turned to Mr. Davies, shouting, Now I'll sue you. I'll drag you into court, you fossil. She's not of sound mind. She doesn't even know what she signed. We have proof. The bank, the gardener, she's incompetent. Mr. Davies didn't flinch. He folded his hands on the table and spoke with perfect calm. On the contrary, he said, you've spent weeks building a case that your mother is a vulnerable elder. Today, you brought a notary into her home to pressure her into signing over her entire estate. A court might view that as attempted elder fraud, and you did it on record. His words landed like a gavel. He hadn't just defended me. He had turned their whole case into evidence against them. Caroline's rage turned back on me. Her face twisted. I'm your daughter, she screamed. That's our money, our inheritance. I looked at her, and when I spoke, my voice was quiet, but it cut through the room like glass. No, Caroline, it was never your money. It was your father's and mine. We earned it. You simply expected it. She stared at me, lips trembling, her expression hollow and stunned. The fight drained out of her. This wasn't just a loss, it was an unraveling. David still hadn't moved. He stared at his own hands like he didn't recognize them. They were the hands of a man who had let it happen, who had watched from the sidelines and said nothing. His silence now said everything. It's done, Mr. Davis said with quiet finality. The trust was funded yesterday. The transfer is recorded. Irrevocable. Arthur's wish executed exactly. He turned to the notary, who looked shell-shocked herself. You may send your invoice to my office, he said. Caroline gave a broken sob and fled the room. A moment later, her car engine screamed down the driveway. David followed, wordless. He didn't look back. The vultures were gone. Weeks passed. Late one afternoon, the sun hung low and golden over the garden. The summer heat had finally eased. The air was soft and the roses were blooming. I stood by the bushes with Leo, shears in hand. I showed him where to cut. Right above the 5-leaflet leaf, I told him. That's where the strongest growth comes from. He made the snip, clean, careful, just like Arthur used to. Leo had been quiet since arriving, the weight of what he'd inherited still settling into his shoulders. Finally, he set the shears down on the bench and turned to me. Grandma, he said, his voice low. We need to talk. I don't think I can take it. All that money, it's not right. It should go to the family. I looked at him. I saw Arthur's spirit in his eyes, steady, good, kind. I reached up and cupped his face in my hands, my skin against his, soft and old, warm and sure. Leo, I said gently, your grandfather and I didn't save money. Money's just paper. We saved seeds. For 50 years we gathered them, protected them, waited. I looked around at the garden, the green life stretching in every direction. We were waiting for the right soil. I turned back to him, my voice steady. Your mother and your uncle, their soil is rocky. Anything planted there grows twisted. They would have buried those seeds in a vault, counted them, hoarded them. But a seed in a vault is just a dead thing. I touched his heart. Your heart is good soil, deep and rich. Arthur knew it, I know it. That's why it's yours now, not to keep, but to grow. Leo's eyes filled. He didn't speak. He just nodded, slow and certain. He understood. He wasn't inheriting wealth. He was inheriting purpose. I picked up the shears again and made one final cut. A dry, withered branch fell away, light as air. Then I looked out over the lawn to the oak tree we planted 50 years ago. It stood tall, strong, unshakable. Caroline had wanted the house. David had wanted the money. But they never saw the real treasure. They never saw the view. In the end, I didn't take anything from them. I simply gave it all to someone who knew how to help things grow. So, that's my story. I'd love to hear what you think. What would you have done if your children tried to take control of your life like that? Let me know in the comments and subscribe for more stories like mine.